Welcome to Boring Conversation, a Malifaux podcast.
And welcome back to Boring Conversation for episode 9. In this episode, I'm joined by Maeve Fox. Say hello to everybody, Maeve.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
I was like, there's no audio. What happened? All right, we're good. So Maeve actually joined me to kind of on short notice for us to throw together a game to try out the new Asami title, Asami Takusen. And as it happened, the week that we recorded, her support model, Lady Yume, also got teased. So we threw together a game. Maeve played Euripides into my Lady Yume and Asami Takusen. But before we get to talking about the game, importantly, as ever, what are you drinking tonight, Maeve?
I mean, you know what I've got. There's literally a Guinness right in my hand. It's comfort beer.
I kind of assumed that would be the case. So today, on the way home from work, I stopped and got a Guinness Extra Stout. Which I poured myself a nice tall glass of. So we get to be Guinness buddies today. Big difference between the Guinness Extra Stout and the regular Guinness is that the Extra Stout has a little bit higher alcohol content. This one comes in at about 5.6 ABV, whereas a standard Guinness is around 4 or 4.5. Another big difference is that the Guinness Extra Stout is carbonated with regular CO2, as opposed to being on nitro, which most draught Guinness would be. You get the nitro can and you dump it in and you get the nice cascade. This is just a traditional CO2. So it gives it a little bit more of a prickly mouthfeel. You don't get the same kind of smooth, silky mouthfeel that you get out of a regular Guinness. So there's your little bit of beer geekery for today. So, I was kind of thinking it's maybe a little bit dull, especially where these have been so recently teased, to go over everything on the cards. But I feel like going over at least some of the highlights of the two new models that we tested today, those being Asami Takusen and Lady Yume, just to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. Maybe not everybody saw the Waldo's weeklies, or they're not really that familiar with the models. So when they read them over, things didn't maybe click. So I was thinking what we could do is I'll read off some of the key differences between the new Asami title and classic Asami, and we'll do kind of like a high-level overview of Lady Yume's card and talk about how that might fit in with the crew. So big difference with Asami Takusen is the type of, like, how much survivability she has. So this one lost protected, but it gained Arcane Shield too. Pretty cool. She's got a cool ability called Chains of the Earth, which is very similar to Molly's front of card ability, where if this model's the crew leader, after an enemy model within line of sight declares an action that it has already taken that activation, it gains Injured 1. Pretty cool. Molly's does damage. This one gives injured. Another one this is kind of a longer one, but basically she has an ability called Dimensional Rifts. It can only be triggered once per activation. And after resolving an action in which another friendly Oni ends a move within 1 inch of either a friendly rift marker or this model may place that Oni anywhere within 8 inches of its current position and within 1 inch of either this model or a friendly rift marker. After placing a model in this way, remove any friendly rift markers within 1 inch of the placed model. So the reason that I read that whole ability verbatim is that there's a lot of little intricacies there. But essentially what it means is that the crew has a really impressive amount of mobility. I think in play even more than I really realized just looking at the card, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the game. And then another big front of card ability, again, once per activation, after another friendly Oni ends a move within 8 inches, it may discard a flicker token to gain shielded 1. Now, if anybody doesn't know how Oni work, they can gain flicker tokens to gain positive flips on attack and damage or any other duels. But then if at the end of any model's activation they have 3 flicker tokens or more, they disappear. They die. Just like that. So this gives them an ability where they can actually start using their flicker tokens as a resource, as opposed to just trying to find ways to get rid of them, of which there are very few.
Is there any way that Asami can get flicker tokens herself?
No. The only way that models can gain flicker tokens is if they have the front of card ability From Beyond, which most of the Oni models, although we'll talk about this when we get to Lady Yume, most of the Oni models have this From Beyond ability, which is when performing a duel, you can gain a flicker token to gain a positive flip to that duel and any damage flips that it generates. So you can use that on opposed duels, simple duels, if you're just trying to hit TNs. Now it's a fairly finite resource because you can get up to 3 flicker real quick.
Mm-hmm.
It does not take much, so you need to be very careful about when you actually gain flicker, for fear of not having it when you really need it, or putting yourself in a situation where you might lose a model, which, spoiler alert, happened to me. So that's Asami's front of card. There's a couple other things that are similar to her original, so we won't talk about those. She has the same base attack that she does for regular Asami, which is just a 1-inch engage, 246 damage track. Key thing is that she lost some triggers on it, especially execute. So regular Asami has execute. This one does not. She only actually has 1 trigger on this attack, and it's called Unstable Rift. You can remove a flicker token, or as a cost, you have to remove a flicker token from a friendly Oni within 4 inches. So you can't even do this if you don't have flicker on something nearby, which is pretty important. Move a friendly rift marker up to 4 inches. If it ends in base contact with the target, place the target anywhere within 4 inches of their current position. Rifts are something that she generates with another one of her abilities, which is the next one that we're going to read, but essentially they are hazardous, destructible 30mm markers. That's it. So that's kind of cool because it slightly increases her damage potential, because you can move the rift through the enemy model and then drop the enemy model onto another rift, which causes them to take hazardous terrain damage. It also lets you do all sorts of movement tricks, which is something that's really key to this crew.
Yeah.
So she's got, and this is probably the ability on her card that I have the most issue with. It's called Into the Beyond. It essentially is an 8-inch shockwave, no projectile symbol, so she can do it in combat. And instead of dropping a shockwave, drop a hazardous and destructible rift marker, centering its shockwave on that marker. It's a shockwave 1, which is important. Move 13, damage 2. A friendly Oni may ignore the effects of this shockwave and are unaffected by rift markers. And then on a mask, you get a pulled in trigger, which lets you place models damaged by this action anywhere within 1 inch of the dropped marker. Again, you can put them on top of the marker so that when they activate, they'll take hazardous damage. So those are the only her 2 abilities on the back of her card. Both of her attacks use rift markers. And then we already talked about the interactions with rift markers for teleporting and stuff on the front. So her those are the only things that actually have anything to do with rifts on her card. She has another attack, which is pretty cool. I didn't really get a chance to utilize it to full effect in our game, but it's called Spiritual Invasion, another 8-inch attack. It's a 6 with a built-in mask, targeting willpower. 2/3 damage. This model, and the target suffers 2/3 damage and gains this model's choice of either staggered or injured 1. The built-in mask gives her the possession trigger, which is very cool. Bury another friendly Oni within 8 inches of this model and the target. When the buried model activates, unbury it within 1 inch of the target or this model. So you can do all sorts of wacky stuff with that, like target an enemy beater that hasn't activated yet for the turn, or target a scheme runner that hasn't activated yet. Bury one of your Oni, and then it doesn't matter where that model goes. When you activate the Oni that you buried, you're going to pop out right next to it, probably after it's activated.
Seems really good for Katashiro.
Yes. Yes, because they have the made to kill. Exactly. It's very good for a bunch of stuff. Pretty cool for Katashiro because they get the free attack off of it, for sure. Another cool thing, which I noticed before the game, but we never really had an opportunity to do so, is possession. Neither spiritual invasion nor the possession trigger have an enemy only restriction. So you can attack one of your own models, take the built-in possession trigger, bury one of your models, move your model up the table, and there's some real fast owning out there. Like there's some stuff that can go incredibly far. And you're essentially making like a troop carrier from another game. I mean, you've got like a Rhino from 40K, where you just moved your model, 12, 14, 16, 18 inches up the board, and now your other model that hasn't activated yet pops up on that side of the board and does whatever you need it to do, attack an enemy for like a, alpha strike, or do some scheming, or do whatever you need to do. So there's some really wacky stuff that you can do with that. Now, of course, you run the risk of the model that you attacked getting killed, and then you have to unbury next to Asami. But at least you have an option to, still unbury. And I think that in the rules, like if neither of those conditions are met, you could unbury in your deployment. But then, yeah, at any rate, the only other ability that she has is her single bonus action, and it's called Wrath of the Kimon. You don't need to flip anything for it. There's no TN. Target a friendly model with From Beyond, 8-inch range. Target may activate a second time this turn. At the start of its second activation, it gains 3 flicker tokens.
So good.
Right, and if you remember, if you end any model's activation with 3 or more flicker tokens, you die. So if you're going to use that ability, you really have to be careful about when you use it. You have to use it on something that either has no flicker tokens, and during the course of its activation will be able to kill a model or hit a trigger or something like that to drop one of those flicker tokens. Otherwise, the model's going to die. There's one model in the crew that has a built-in way to
I think you
to
used
drop
it
flicker
once.
tokens. I used it once. Never really had a good opportunity to do it again, because as soon as you have a flicker token on a model, if you use that on them, now they're going to go up to 4 tokens, and you're going to have to try and figure out a way to drop 2 tokens during that second activation. So it's very, very difficult to do. So that's pretty much Asami in a nutshell. There's a lot of interesting interactions that we'll talk about between her and some of the other models in her crew. But that should give you just a baseline idea of how she works. We're going to talk a little bit about Lady Yume now. Now, one really cool thing about Lady Yume is, I think Lady Yume and probably the Guisen from the
Other side box.
The other side box. I think that those are the only 2 models that we've seen that they've teased in that they're going to come out around the same time as these new alt titles. So Lady Yume is the first one that we've actually seen rules for. Guisen, the only thing we know about them is that they're going to come in the other side starter box, which also has Kirai in it. They're both Court of 2 models, so you can safely assume that there's probably going to be some Malifaux rules for them as well, but we haven't seen what those are. So what that means is that in whatever book release that they have, we're not only going to have these alternate titles, but now we're also going to have new models to go along with these alternate title masters, not alternate title versions of like henchmen and enforcers or anything like that. And then the other really cool thing that we see on Lady Yume is that she is a 10 Thunders model, but she actually has 2 keywords. She has Oni, which you would expect, and she has Nightmare. So she can get hired into Dreamer.
It'll be interesting to see where she falls in with Dreamer too.
Yeah, and they did a pretty good job with some of her abilities of making sure that they will work in either crew. Some of her abilities have one effect that's actually going to work in the Oni crew and one that's going to work in the Nightmare crew, while some of her other abilities just work with both crews. So she's an 8-stone enforcer, 8 wounds. She's got Feed on Fear, Terrifying 12, Unimpeded, and then her 2 new front of card abilities are From 2 Worlds. So when this model activates, it may place a flicker token on a friendly model within 6 inches with the From Beyond ability, or choose a friendly card removed from the game and discard it. Obviously, that second one applies to Dreamer. After doing either, draw a card. So she has a way to preload your Oni models with a flicker at the start of her activation, which is actually pretty helpful for making sure that when they walk next to Asami or do some sort of other place effect, they can then remove that flicker, gain a shielded. It allows you to get the flicker resource out without having to use an ability on their card to generate it first, because you're actually going to use your flicker by, in the sense of both gaining it and dropping it for some abilities in the new crew. And then Warp the Veil. Once per activation, after a model is placed within 6 inches, this model may look at the top 2 cards of that model's fate deck. This model may discard any non-Joker card looked at with a value of 5 or less. Now, in Maeve and my game, I probably used this about 70% of the times that I should have, just trying to remember that I can use it for enemy places, like when his Gigants teleport next to my models. I could have been, scrying the top of his deck.
Or leaps.
Anything with leaps, with the damned, that kind of thing. So trying to remember that you can use it with enemy models is pretty big, because then you can start, looking at the top 2 cards of their deck, and obviously you're not going to discard any low cards, but you can make sure that you know what's coming and keep their deck stacked in a bad way. And then with the other cool thing about Lady Yume here is that this ability actually functions with either version of Asami. So a lot of Asami's models have flight, so you're going to be able to use the place from that to scry the top of your deck. Anytime Asami summons in Classic Asami, you're going to be able to do the scrying thing. Plus, there's some, any of the rift marker stuff that you're doing with Asami Takusen, you're going to be able to do it. So it actually comes up quite often. There were turns that, in our game, even not even remembering to do it every time, I was probably using that ability 5, 6 plus times. Does that sound about right?
Yep. And I'm looking at it here from a Dreamer point of view. From, you've got not just Dreamer and his summons placing, but you've got an on your heels trigger on to push Chompy into place. You've got the Bandersnatch and Widow Weaver that plays to web markers. So there's a lot of placement effects in both crews that can really... I think she's probably going to see play with Dreamer 1 as much as she will Dreamer 2.
Yeah, and it's an ability that's going to come up so much, and it's not like grossly powerful, but especially in a Dreamer, like a classic Dreamer crew, for instance, where you're already thinning that. Well, you can thin the deck with any Dreamer crew, but you're thinning the deck quite a bit, and now you're also being able to scry the top of your deck and get rid of more weak cards. Like, it's a very useful ability. Yeah. So back of card, she's got a pretty decent melee attack. It's got a really wacky damage track of 2-3-6, with an execute trigger, a puncture trigger, and a hole in the world trigger, which you don't see that one too often. Basically, it's enemy only, and you place the target within 6 inches of its current position, which is a pretty sizable
And
place.
will also trigger Warp the Veil.
Yep. Will trigger Warp the Veil, and it gives her an ability to drop enemies into hazardous terrain, which is something that this crew can do quite a bit of. We'll talk about later on. She's got a 12-inch range, non-projectile, stat 7 on willpower to give the target 1 damage and injured 1. And then because she has feed on fear, if she happens to be engaging something, she could potentially double tap that to do 2 damage, injured 2, and heal 2. So, it's not fantastic, but if you're just trying to lock something down, it's not the worst thing in the world. And then she has a cool bonus action, Coil Around Prey. It's a 3-inch range, stat 3 on size. Place the target into base contact with you. And then it has a Bowled Over and a Glimpse the Void trigger, which is pretty neat. And then as a bonus action, a secondary bonus action, she's got Consume, so she can kill a friendly model, heal equal to its health, and then kill it.
Yep.
Like I said, You probably won't use that too much in the Oni, in the Asami 2 crew. You may use it in the Asami 1 because she can summon more stuff,
Yeah.
and you'll certainly use it in Dreamer 1.
Eat those daydreams.
Yeah. So I just have to get something off my chest here because I've already broken my own rule. You've said it a couple of times. I really, really, really hate the Asami 1, Asami 2 naming convention. I know it's very War Machine, but like I can't really think of a better way to do it unless you just rattle off the whole
title. Yeah.
title every time, which
They'll probably get nicknames like, that might end up being Rift Asami. I'm
Yeah.
sure there'll be a shorthand.
Yeah. I get the feeling that the community's probably going to end up on Asami 1, Asami 2. I hope that doesn't happen because it's just kind of boring.
Yeah.
My vote would be just to use the titles. So you can just say, I'm playing Takusen, or I'm playing Insomniac, or I'm playing Unmasked, or something like that.
I'm okay with that.
So
as long as the titles continue to be interesting, right? Like
right. Interesting, unique, and not to be confused with other titles.
Correct.
That's fine. Yeah. So that's a kind of an overview of the 2 new cards that we tried out this game. So we both kind of gave our overall thoughts on them, but we'll talk some more about how things played out during the course of the game itself.
And I do have to say that if you haven't seen the artwork for these guys, they're going to look fantastic. They're going to be so cool.
And Lady Yume is going to be a massive model.
Yeah.
She is size 4 on a 50 mil. So we might be talking about a giant, snaky demon woman that's the size of a Malifaux Rex. I mean,
beautiful.
Yeah, it could be pretty dope. Probably going to be an amazing model, and I can't wait to see how it gets painted up. Yeah. So without further ado, let's kind of get to the game. So we played Wedge, Break the Line, with Claim Jump, Deathbeds, Spread Them Out, Assassinate, and Bait and Switch. Maeve and I talked a little bit about the strategy options ahead of time, and we settled on Break the Line because we kind of felt that it would be a good match for Asami and still something that Euripides could do, pretty well. We wanted to make sure that neither crew was at a gross advantage or disadvantage. And then for the scheme pool, we fiddled with it a little bit, but the one that we had here seemed like it made, pretty good sense. So
we wanted the game to be fun and not one-sided. Right. Yeah.
Right. So there were a couple of wonky things in scheme selection, like Deathbeds is a questionable choice against Oni because nothing drops corpse markers to use for, that end of game thing. But Euripides is also going to drop a lot of ice pillars, so you have a pretty easy to find marker to kill stuff around.
Yeah.
Bait and Switch is a little sketch in Wedge deployment just because it's so easy to kind of bash in the middle, and then you end up with a huge deployment zone that your opponent can potentially just get a model or 2 into. So probably wasn't really on the table for either of us, I'd imagine. But there we go. So Maeve, do you remember how the game panned out?
Yeah, it went pretty good for the big icy boys.
Yeah, to say the least.
It was a pretty close game, I think, right up until like turn 3, and that's kind of. But I did end up scoring the 8 points. I got both my claim jumps, both my assassinates, and all 4 break the line. Euripides is really good at denying break the line, which is just one of the things I like about him in GG2. So, but I think there were a couple points in the game where it could have bounced either way, depending on flips or just how things got handled. So it was still a very close game, despite the fact that there was some discrepancies in points scored, which is Malifaux.
Yeah, exactly. That's Malifaux. I mean, so I ended up scoring 4 points. I got 2 points for the strat, 2 for assassinate, and I did not get any points for spread them out. In retrospect, I may have been better off not trying to do spread them out and just going for claim jump and then just hoping to win in the middle. As it happened, that probably wouldn't have panned out for me. But I also could have potentially tried Deathbeds, at least scored. It would have been fairly easy to score a single point off that. The end of game might have been a little bit trickier. But at any rate, that's how we panned out.
I think if you would have gone hard in to spread them out, like if you would have really like thrown markers down really early, I would have had a much bigger choice of bunch in the middle like we did, or go stop these markers. Like if and we'll get to it, but like the yokai, if he had bounced off to the side and scored points and the Tengu went to the other side, then you would have probably gotten at least one of those spread mount points, because then I would have had to have figured out how to get over there and stop you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the choice at that point becomes committing the damned to either scoring your break the line and then helping in the middle, or chasing down my models and
Right.
picking up markers. So it would have at the very least cost you some points on the strat, and probably still netted me a point on the scheme. And spoiler alert, that was the plan. Didn't pan out because I took a bad gamble turn 1. So before we get to that, what made you pick Euripides for this game?
So, first of all, I've been on a Euripides kick for a couple months now. I've played several games with him, probably like 8 to 10 games with him. I really like the crew. It's a very interesting. It's a crew that on the surface seems pretty straightforward, and when you start realizing what little tricks and things that you can do with the crew, it becomes much more interesting, which is something I like. I'm not very good with like straightforward crews, so I like having those little intricacies. Like I honestly kind of like playing little mini games during the game with myself, to like figure out how am I going to get here, do this, score this thing. So Yuri is just kind of I've jumped to him in my Neverborn experiments because he's fun. The other thing is Gigants are so good at stopping break the line. Their bonus action cave drawings says that you just can't interact within 2 inches of a marker. So if your opponent can't stop the marker, then they either have to do 1 AP to turn off the marker, and then still need to be in position to drop the interact, or they need blow it to hell or something to be able to be able to score the strategy. So I like having him, even though he doesn't really have like all the extra AP to score the strategy out the way you really want him to be. He has other ways of like, he's one of those, you kick the can just like right over the edge, and you pick the 2 or 3 that you're just going to hold on, and then you deny the rest of the points for your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, he really excels at that play style, and he's his crew is defensive enough with all of the healing and the shielded from the ice pillars, and just being Euripides and Thune themselves being somewhat difficult to kill, and then the rest of the crew just being kind of like average in terms of durability. Just that little bit of healing and the little bit of shielded really goes a long way towards keeping them up.
Absolutely. And Yuri is cool because I really like that Yuri has two separate play styles in the game. He can either be this very aggressive denial, where he's dropping markers down, he's doing 2 damage here, 2 damage there, he's blocking lanes of advancement, or he can go very aggressive aggro, teleport in with his own shattering surprise, and just start wailing on things. He didn't get to do as much punching in this game because he died before he really got to throw throw hands, but he did his early job of slowing you down, to force you to have to deal with all the markers in your way before, and that's what he does. Like half the time he makes it to late turn 3, turn 4, and that's fine. Like you really don't care. By that time you don't necessarily need him around.
Right. Cool. So, I mean, as far as me, what attracted me to Asami, Takusen? So, I've played a good bit of classic Asami. really, really like her crew. I love the Oni aesthetic, and I love stuff that has like lots of movement tricks. I, I'm the first to admit that I love my, hammer to the face, beat the tar out of you kind of crews like your Mawtuckets and your Ophelias.
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like a lot of those types of crews, I don't know. Maybe they don't get quite the credit that they deserve in how threatening they can be on the table. A lot of times, people tend to go towards more tricky masters or your summoners or so on and so forth. But I really love stuff that I can pull off really janky combos with. And I'll tell you what, this particular crew is absolutely loaded with janky
Yes.
combos. So I wanted to give a try to her because I saw the number of little like combo wombo things that you can do between a bunch of her different models, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit as we move on. There are some downsides to the crew, which we'll talk about in the post game like wrap up thoughts. Would I take her into this pool again? Absolutely. I feel like if there's any kind of pool that she would do fine in, this is one. I think that she's a crew that you're going to need a lot of practice to nail down.
I think so too.
Yeah. So we're not going to do like a blow by blow. This happened this turn. This happened this turn. We scored this turn. This isn't necessarily a battle report style podcast episode. It's going to be more of a basic overview of the game. So we're going to talk about some highlights, some models that really performed well, maybe what some turning points in the game were. And then we'll move on to post-game thoughts, because really what people want to hear about is how did the new models do and how do they compare to the originals? At least that's what.
Did we want to run through our crews real quick?
We probably should do that. Yes,
Okay.
I thought about it while you were talking about Euripides, and then I forgot.
All right, so I'll go ahead. Yep. In my crew, because I took Euripides, of course. I took Primordial Magic. I took Thune, 2 Gigants, a Garyon, a Blackblood Shaman, and the Damned. I don't normally take the Blackblood Shaman, but I made the mistake of listening to the Capital City podcast. Shout out to those guys. And I haven't tried it yet, so I thought I'd give it a shot. Usually I throw a Changeling in there instead to try to get some extra pillars around, but I think it turned out pretty good. I think the Shaman into a mature on turn 3 made a big difference that late game. So no upgrades, 6 Soulstones. That's pretty much what it was.
Minor point of correction: you turned him into a mature on turn 2.
He didn't get into
which made a much bigger impact on the game.
Yeah, he didn't get into the real fray until turn 3.
I mean, he still got an attack turn 2.
Yeah.
So yeah. At any rate, I took Asami, Takusen, the totem, of course, Amino Zako, her henchman, a Joragumo, Lady Yume, an Obsidian Oni, a Yokai, and a Tengu. And I had the 6 stones. I didn't take any upgrades. I think you had what, 6?
Yeah,
you had 6 stones as well, right? Yeah, 6 as well. All right, cool. So, I mean, some kind of highlights of the game. Turn 1, I made a major misplay, and that was that I took my Yokai, who kind of the way that one of the combos works with the Yokai is they have a front of card ability called Ephemeral Warrior, which is I think they're the only thing in the crew that has it, or in the keyword that has it, where when they gain a flicker token, they can place anywhere within 3 inches of their current position. Great. So what you can do is you can set up in such a way that Asami goes early in the turn. She takes a walk, does stuff, probably throws out a couple of rift markers that you can use to teleport to, or she can throw a rift marker behind her so that her crew can walk to the rift marker and then teleport next to her. So she's not usually doing too much more than that turn 1, at least the way that I kind of like workshopped my turn 1, unpacking. So she walks up, she drops a couple of rifts, and basically just makes, stands, 5 inches up from where she started. So Lady Yume activates, uses her front of card ability to put a flicker token onto the Yokai. The Yokai gains the flicker token, so he gets to place within 3 inches of his current position. When he places within 3 inches of his current position, he's within Asami's 8-inch aura. So he loses the flicker token, gains a shielded, and I get to scry the top of my deck with Lady Yume. Great. So later in the turn, I activate the yokai, fairly late. During Asami's activation, I also used her bonus action on the yokai to give it reactivate. So I know it's going to be able to activate twice. I hold its activation until late in the turn. There's a vulnerable model. At the start of its activation, I use his bonus action, which lets him take an interact action even when engaged, gain a flicker token. Gains the flicker token, places within 3, swaps the flicker for shielded, scries the top of the deck. Now at this point, he's placed within 1 inch of Asami, because that second place gets him close enough. So on his bonus action, he places next to Asami and then places 8 inches away next to a rift marker. So he hasn't even used any AP yet, and he has no flicker tokens on him at the moment, and shielded too. And I've scried the top of my deck at the start of the activation, or after he does the place. So now I see, okay, Maeve has a Gigant. The Gigant is vulnerable. It only has 4 wounds left because I hit it with something else. I should be able to kill it. So it had 5 wounds left, and then it had to shield it. So I take a swing at it, knock the shielded off, knock it down to 4 wounds. My second attack misses. I'm like, man, I really wanted to kill this thing. I've got a decent hand of cards. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I can hit this thing 2 more times when I activate, as long as I hit either a tome trigger on the attack or I kill it. I'm going to be able to get rid of one of my flicker tokens, and then my yokai won't die. So I activate, second activation, take a couple of swings. Maeve gets a Joker. I don't get the chance to kill the thing. My yokai disappears without killing the Gigant on turn 1.
That
because I took a bad gamble.
That Gigant
basically
lived too, man. He was a trooper. Like he should have died real quick, and he stayed on longer than he should have, considering I dropped him pretty hard into the middle there. I think that was the same. Was that the same turn too that a Gigant also got, or was it the next turn that a Gigant got a red Joker on a rock throw?
Yep, that was the next turn. It was the other Gigant got a red Joker on a rock throw to smash my Tengu from afar before I got a chance to activate it. So, yeah, that plays right into my next highlight, which is tossing rocks. Gigants do a lot of work.
Gigants are so good for 6 points. They're so good. I mean, a stat 6 gun that you can just chuck a card and ignore line of sight is big. And I will give a shout out to the Black Blood Shaman, because they had focus. I was able to get through your concealment aura on Amananjaku. So those 2 Gigants really did the work. I would say the Gigants, Thune, and the Damned are probably like they were top players.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Gigants in general, just in terms of the keyword models, I think that for their cost, they're probably the best keyword model, because they're very inexpensive. And sure, they die, but like, whatever.
They're going to do work before they get there. Yeah,
I mean, what are they? 6 points?
Yeah, they're 6 points.
Yeah, I mean, every 6-point model in the game is going to die. Yeah. Like, whatever. But they have a great damage track. Their gun is solid, and they have a lot of really tricky stuff that they can do with teleporting and turning off interacting. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they're very, very good models. Speaking of the Damned, that's another highlight. That Damned, as soon as you said Euripides, I said, well, I'm definitely going to see the Damned on the other side of the table, and that model sucks to deal with.
Yeah.
It's fairly new. We don't need to go over the whole card, but I mean, long story short, it's got hard to wound. It's got 9 wounds on an 8 stone model.
Mm-hmm.
It can heal itself with Eat Your Fill. It has a leap with a built-in suit. It has a great damage track.
Yeah,
I mean, like, the list goes on. This model is just
Chronicle,
fantastic.
I like that Chronicle did quite a bit of damage.
Yeah,
throughout too.
That Chronicle, it went off probably 4 or 5 times in the game.
Well, because
I mean, that's pretty good.
Because all of the Euripides models, all the Savage models have the and if they end their activation, they get heal 1 and they get shielded. And as soon as that happened, it pings out. And then like the Garyon had ate an ice pillar to heal up, pinged it out again. So like the overall, like, especially when what happened in that game where the majority of our forces kind of got stuck in the middle, like once that happens and the damned is kind of like hanging out on the outside doing his thing, those sort of independent heals start like really adding up that damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, so what ended up happening with the damned was that since it didn't have to deal with the yokai, because I goofed turn 1 pretty bad, was it ended up scoring 2 points for break the line, and then was still able to get back to the middle and killed my Jorogumo at a very inopportune time for me, and did a bunch of damage to. I think did it get into Asami or Lady Yume? I can't remember.
I buried Lady Yume ended the game buried.
Oh, she got buried. That's what it was.
But I think he might have been the one to kill Amananjaku.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Got it. He got into my totem, and then he also ended up getting into Amanozako.
Yeah,
did both.
Yeah. And I think because that really, it was the tag team of the damned and the Thune on that flank, because Thune was able to eat the Jorogumo early on, which left like Amanozako was scary. But I mean, she killed Euripides, so like she's definitely scary. But taking out that Jorogumo for most of the game was a big deal. And I think like didn't Thune hit severe on the damage too on the Joro or something like that? Like I know he did a lot of damage before he buried him.
He got the Jorogumo down to 5 wounds before he got buried, which put him within single attack striking distance of dead when he got unburied later in the game.
Yeah. And that was a cute trick. I'll give you points. You got a cute trick. What was it? Turn 4, I think. You popped Amanozako up.
Yeah, it was turn 4. So what I did was using Asami's movement tricks. Amanjaku, the totem, was like way behind the lines, like behind a big like freight car. Really wasn't able to affect the game in any significant way. And I had the Jorogumo was buried kind of centerboard in an ice pillar, and he was totally surrounded by models. Like there was like a Garyon right next to the ice pillar on one side, and Thune was on the other side, and there was a Cyclops down below it. And it was going to be like impossible for me to get to this thing. And at that point, you had already managed to kill my Obsidian Oni, which I had taken for burn it down so that I could pulse out like a big 4-inch aura blowing up ice pillars, which was very helpful early in the game. But you'd already killed it, so I couldn't just click the button and then free up all my frozen models. So I had to use Asami's activation to drop like 3 rift markers close to the buried Jorogumo, so that you couldn't, like, if I just dropped 1 rift marker over there, then you just activate a model, pick up the marker, and that whole plan goes out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Even dropping 2, I can't really guarantee that you don't just pick up both of them because of the way that the picking up destructible terrain works, where it's a 1-inch aura. So I literally it was a huge waste of, well, it wasn't a waste, but it was a big AP investment from Asami, where I had to drop 3 rift markers all next to each other just to make it so that you wouldn't activate and pick them all up. And then walk Amanjaku from behind the freight car, behind Asami within an inch, which then let me place right next to the ice pillar, and then use his other AP to pop the Jorogumo out. And I think when I did that, you uttered a very audible "aw, damn it" or something along those lines.
I did, because I had you blocked in, and I looked, and there was nowhere for the Jorogumo to come out, so I felt pretty confident about it. And then I moved Thune down to like charge Lady Yume or something like that, and I moved him just far enough out to where the Joro had room to pop back up. Granted, it's wedge deployment. The Joro would have popped back up in a good spot anyway, but
yeah. So suffice it to say, the Jorogumo popped back out, and I was feeling pretty good about that. I didn't realize that literally the only spot that the Jorogumo could pop out was actually in engagement range of the damned. So I finished Amanjaku's activation, and then you just activated the damned and took a focus swing.
Yeah, he had 2 focus on him. Yeah, he just ate him, and then just disrespectfully went off and got break the line. Like,
it was like, oh great.
Yeah, it was a disrespect move for sure from the damned.
It was. Bit of a slap in the face there. One cool thing that did happen, though, in terms of high points, was being able to knock Euripides down to 7 wounds at the end of turn 2 so that I could score my first point of assassinate, and then top of turn 3, drawing into a red joker so that I could punch through his shield and knock him down to hard to kill with Amonozako, and then on the second attack kill him.
Yeah.
Before he got a chance to activate, which was pretty cool.
And that's one of the things about Euripides and Assassinate is that you got to be very careful. There's no, like, Euripides is the only model, one of the only models that doesn't have the heal at the end of the activation. So old ways, like, and I knew that going in, like, I couldn't be super aggressive with old ways with him like I am with some games, because you're going to give up the assassinate points. But I think somewhere in that I kind of was like, you know what, I'm going to give 2 points up. That's fine. Like, Yuri did work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you take Euripides and expect him to make it to the end of the game.
Yeah, for sure.
He's he is defensive in the sense that he's got a lot of wounds, but those wounds are a resource, and then aside from that, it's just
outside of taking like Serena and the crew, which I've tried a couple times, and most of the time I'd rather take something else. Like, I know that that's Neverborn Blasphemy, but for Savage in general, there's just so many good options between the Damned and the Thune and Agarion. Like, you almost always want one Agarion. That heave trigger just ate your Obsidian Oni alive. Like, and
the heave trigger was huge. I mean, the Obsidian Oni was in a very defensible position, and he was central to the table so that he could pulse away stuff. He could put out a really bad hazardous burning aura, but then you heaved him into a patch of hazardous terrain.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, on any model with armor, that's like anathema to them. It's bad news.
Yeah, it was a solid. And then by that point, the Black Blood Shaman had joined had become a mature and joined the Punch Fest. So,
and Thune did what Thune does. I mean, you held his activation until an opportune time. You froze 2 key models that I really needed in the game, like freezing the Joragumo. I think early. Was it late turn 2?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It was the last activation of turn 2. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was just terrible for me. I mean, the Joragumo was really helping to hold down the center. That extended reach right in the middle of the table, when it's already a fairly tight area to be fighting in, is so oppressive. But the fact that you were able to get in there and freeze him was very bad. And then later on, you ended up freezing Lady Yume, I think, top of turn 4, maybe? I think it was top of turn 4 before she got to activate.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it was ended. Yeah, it was turn 3. It was even turn 3.
Oh, it was turn 3, yeah. And it was a gamble, too, rushing in like that on the Joro, because my hand in turn 2 was pretty terrible. And so, like, part of the reason I waited so long was, I wanted you to kind of weed out your hand a little bit, which Yuri helped do that, because he dropped some ice pillars. Kind of like you had to choose whether you were going to take the 2 damage and, keep going. Which, because I was trying really hard to kill Amonozako, I've learned from early experiences playing against Asami that you don't want Asami to die with Amonozako still on the board. He's a little monster. So I wanted to kill him.
Into a beast.
And you kept flipping really well for him, so that didn't happen. But it did eat your hand up, which allowed me to use that. I think I used like a 10 to cap the Joro, which, so it was a gamble, but it paid off. Like, and
I think when you say eating my hand, that's putting it lightly. So what really happened was Maeve went first turn 2 and went with Euripides, and by the end of Euripides' activation, I had 2 cards in my hand. So it was bad. And I think that the cards were like a 2 and like a 13. So I really only had 1 other usable card in there. So yeah, it was pretty rough.
Yeah. So, I felt pretty good about that. Like, one of the things that I've been trying to do to become a better player is think about moments where orders of activation is really important, and like when I can learn to use leverage for advantages that I've built in the turn. So using Euripides to reduce your hand when I had a really bad hand meant that, because I had that choice in that turn whether I could activate the Gigan who was on 1 first, or I could activate Euripides first, and I was like, sure, the Gigant will get to go if I activate him, but what's he gonna do? Like he's engaged with the Joro, like he's not gonna do anything. So then I was like, okay, we'll activate Yuri first. Yuri, ate your hand, and that allowed that Gigant to live a little bit.
Right. And what ends up happening if you don't activate Euripides first is Amonozako activates, charges Euripides, gets an attack, probably hits because at that point I have a full hand and your hand was garbage, and then pops her hazardous severe aura. So now every time Yuri does anything, he's taking hazardous damage, and it creates this big exclusion aura around him where it's tough for your other models to come in and support him. So that would have been, yeah, activating Yuri first was definitely the right call.
Yeah, for sure. It was a good moment. As a player, I was happy with that moment because I was like, there's a spot where I've matured a little bit, or I recognized this is a good spot in the game to do that sort of thing. So I was pretty happy about that.
So, like we were kind of saying before, I mean, the game was looking pretty even, honestly. Even with me losing the yokai early, you had some models with quite a bit of damage on them, going into kind of like midway through turn 2, and things were starting to look a little bit rocky for you. Most of my crew was still alive. Start of turn 3, I killed Euripides before he got a chance to activate, so like that was, pretty bad. At that, when I killed Euripides, it also healed Amonozako from like 4 wounds back up to full with the drink blood trigger. So things were looking pretty rough. But then by the end of turn 3, I think I had 4 models left on the table with 2 buried. Oh well, yeah, 4 models left on the table with Lady Yume buried, and the Jorogumo was dead, and you'd only lost like I think a Gigan.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
I think the Gigant and Yuri were the only models I lost.
Yeah, you had lost the Gigan and you'd lost Euripides, and at that point things were looking pretty rough for me because you'd killed my Tengu that was scheme running off on the side, so you denied me a third break the line point.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the yokai to do anything on the right flank. And then all my models were just penned in the middle by ice pillars and your big, chunky models. And at that point, I was like, I can't win this game. So all I can really do at this point is just try and learn more about the crew by doing some goofy stuff and just try to, get as many points as I can. So, yeah. What looked like a really good start for me at the beginning of turn 3 was very much the opposite by the end of turn 3.
Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with me being able to get that Yuri activation. If I hadn't, and I think I cheated. Like a 12 or a 13 in to make sure I got that too. So like,
yeah, you cheated in a 13.
Yes,
I cheated a 12 because it was the highest card that I had at that time.
Yeah.
And you beat it with the 13.
Yeah, so getting that Yuri, like if I hadn't gotten that Yuri activation in, I think it would have been a very different turn, because he did manage to block off a couple models to keep them out of the way, and I think he swung on Amma pretty hard too on that turn. So
yeah, you ice pillared twice and then you charged me, and you knocked Amma down to I think like 4 wounds.
Yeah. And he was on injured too because he used the ice pillars twice because of Asami's aura. So that was rough. Or he's injured 1, I guess. So
injured 1. Yeah.
But all in all, like I said, I think that was that key point. Like me being able to kind of go first there, and then leveraging in Thune to do what he needed to do. Thune is that model, man. If you don't have a plan for Thune, he's gonna ruin your day. Like, he's so, and it's kind of unfortunate because like other than that trigger, he's not amazing. Like, there's nothing on him that's like intuition is really good. His gun is okay. His melee stats, like his damage track's okay, but it's that trigger. Like,
Yeah.
that thing is gross.
If he didn't have Frozen Trophy, would you play him?
Not at that cost. No, not at that cost. I'd play him at 8, maybe. Yeah, but Frozen Trophy is huge, and it's such a gameable ability where you're gonna find ways to use like it being able to pick out like one model. And that's kind of why when I was talking about like why I would bring Euripides, Thune was a very important part of that process too, because like against the regular Asami, you're going to be summoning M models, so Thune isn't as important to stopping those big models. But against this Asami, I knew that if I could nail that Joro quickly, you didn't have a way to replace it. And so that's what Thune does. He picks like one model on the flank and just removes it from the board in a single activation, and then can just go do whatever he needs to do. So yeah, if you don't have that marker removal, like it's a Thune ruins days. It's frustrating.
For sure. And like once, at the end of turn 3, once you had Thune and the Garyon and the Damned and the Mature Nephilim at that point in the center.
Yeah.
And the only model that I had that could do any amount of damage was Amano Zako. I was like, there's no way that I can come back from this. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, that said, I'm going to say one little thing, and I'm going to earn the ire of all of the Neverborn players out there. But I have had a problem with Black Blood Shaman for a long time. I think they are too good. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, no, I agree. They're really good.
Yeah, I mean they're doing like a Ma Tucket style, aura or a pulse of focus, for the cost of any mask.
Yeah, pretty much
any mask, right? To drop a corpse marker.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, for any mask, you're dropping a corpse marker, and then you're eating one of those corpse markers to pulse out focus, and also getting you halfway to growing to a mature. So if you happen to flip or have 2 masks of any type in your hand turn 1, you can poke a model for 2 damage. It's going to heal one of those damage at the end of the Black Blood Shaman's activation because of Blood Clot. You're going to eat a grow token to give yourself all the focus, and then as soon as the Black Blood Shaman activates on turn 2, you can just use Blasphemous Ritual again, which doesn't even require a card flip, and now you're immature.
Yeah.
So you got a 4 stone discount on a Mature Nephilim that comes in with 6 wounds, and sure, it's like further back the table, but it's flight 6?
Yeah, it's big.
So like it's probably still going to be able to get at least 1 attack off on turn 2.
And it's regen too, so it goes back up to 8 wounds as soon as it activates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I hate to say it, Neverborn, I know you guys are very protective of your stuff, and rightly so. You've had some things taken away from you, and you haven't had a whole lot of buffs. But Black Blood Shaman, I think, have been a problem for a long time, and I don't really feel like people talk about how much of a problem they are. Maybe I'm just off base. But like they're a Super Friends model. Like I don't see a reason that you wouldn't hire one for 7 points into any crew, because they're giving out a ton of focus and generating a ton of AP efficiency, and you're getting a monstrous beater out of them.
Yeah.
Probably turn 2.
And in Euripides, when on turn 1 in Euripides, kind of to help you set up, all of the ice pillars and stuff you need, you're probably going to be using Old Ways. So healing or Blood Clot lets you use Old Ways a little more aggressively, because you're not, you're not as worried about dropping down wounds, because you're just going to heal it right back up.
Right. So
yeah.
My well, it's not a hot take because I've been talking about it for a long time in private, just not on a public forum, is that Black Blood Shaman are potentially a problem.
Yeah.
And don't hate me for it. I'm sorry, guys.
And if you look at that list, like I thought about it, because like with Deathbeds in the list or with Spread Them Out in the list, like your first instinct is to grab a Cyclops. And the Cyclops would have not done anything good in that game, honestly. Nowhere near what the Mature Nephilim or what the Mature and Black Blood Shaman did. Like, and I looked at deathbeds and I was like, that's cute, but me, like,
Yeah, I mean, just the focus pulse alone with the huge damage tracks that your crew has
Mhm.
is so impactful.
yeah,
I mean, if you hadn't had that focus, that would have been, I think, I'm trying to think, that would have been 2 models that weren't dead from one attack.
yeah, probably.
Just in that game, because really, no, really, because like that focus let you kill the Joragumo in a single attack with the damned. It let you drop the Joragumo down to 5 wounds in the first place with Thune, who has a min damage too. And it's what do you call it? It's one of the things that got Amonozako down to 4 wounds.
Yeah.
When Yuri took a swing at him. Because again, you hit severe. I think you hit me for what, 5 or 6 or something like that.
Big
Whatever
6.
Yuri's severe is. Big 6, yeah. So there you go. So those are kind of the highlights of the game. Post game thoughts. Talking specifically on Asami and Lady Yume. So rather than like me sharing all of my thoughts and then you sharing all of your thoughts, I feel like one thing to do is like, just because I've kind of put a lot of thought into it, I'll just start kind of sharing some things and then you can interject and we can make it sort of more conversational. Does that sound
That's good.
And then if I miss anything or you have any additional thoughts, you can just add them after the fact. So one of the things that you said during kind of our debrief at the end of the game was that like we had talked about it being a very fragile crew. So for anybody that's played classic Asami, you'll know that the Oni models really have no significant defensive abilities at all. Like a lot of them are defense 5. They have relatively low wound counts. There are no real defensive abilities on any of them. Amonozako has terrifying 11, but like none of the other stuff is terrifying. There's no hard to wound. There's no hard to kill. There's no innate healing. So the only thing that this crew has is a little bit of incidental shielding, which like for anybody who's played crews that use a lot of shielded, you'll know that like it only gets you so far. It's a band-aid. It's not a solution.
When you want to rely on shielded, it's going to fail for you. Like, it's not great. But in those instances where you just need a model to stay alive, shielded is a great. Like, it's a great defense, but it's never
It's
one
not
you have.
bad.
Right. It's never one you can rely on.
Right. Yeah, it's not bad, but it should never be something that is the key survivability mechanism of the crew. So the crew's very fragile. Like Maeve was saying during our debrief, like it's a bunch of models that are costed and statted for summoning that are suddenly not summoned. So you don't really have a choice but to hire a bunch of Oni because this crew and the way that Asami Takusen works does not function with out of keyword hires. Like she doesn't benefit any models that aren't Oni at all. So you pretty much have to hire within keyword. And they're very much so glass cannons because they drop like just sacks of potatoes. And to be quite frank, like they don't really deal a ton of damage. Certainly not to the same level of like some other stuff. Like Amonozako is a 3-4-5 damage track.
Right.
Not bad. Doesn't have any way to increase her damage, no crit strike, no, anything like that. Has the drink blood thing so that she can bump, her health back up, can put out the big hazardous severe aura, which is fantastic. But doesn't deal like a boatload of damage.
Well, it's the Thunder's issue, right?
It's the Thunder's thing. Right, it's the Thunder's issue. I mean, like, Joragumo are min 3, and they're very scary.
Yeah.
Like, they're easily the scariest model in the keyword. But, like, all the other stuff is min 2. Yokai for all the, jumping around, Nightcrawler, fucking ninja moves, extra attacks they can do. They're a 2-3-4 damage track.
Right.
Katashiro are, I think, a 1-3-4 or something like that. Like min 1, pretty sucky.
Yeah, I hate those guys. So
yeah, Tengu, same thing. Like min 1, and obviously they're not meant to be damage dealing models, but like even with Katashiro, they kind of fill this weird gap between aggro model because they have made to kill, and they've got I can't remember what their other triggers are, but suffice it to say, they can scheme because they have the free place. They can take some extra attacks because they have made to kill. I think they have the trigger to give them extra attacks as well. But they're hitting on a 1-3-4 damage track on a stat 5, which is like not very good.
Right.
So it's a glass cannon crew that also doesn't really punch that hard. You know?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of their big problems is like they're very balanced. And say you've got a lot of scheme tricks, you've got a lot of movement tricks, you've got a lot of decent but not amazing. Like yokai have a decent damage track for a 5 soulstone model. But they don't excel in any specific thing, which is, when we were talking about on our last episode that I was in about summoning, that's kind of where summoning models should be. They should be decent. But the problem is now they're not summon models, they're hired models. And Asami is supposed to crank them up to 11, which I think that this version of Asami does a good job of doing some of that. She doesn't really give them... She does give them damage output in that she allows them to move without using AP as often. So you're using, what is it they say? The less walk actions you take in a game, but she is now suddenly a much more finesse style master, which I like.
Right. And finesse style masters tend to be very unforgiving. Like, and that I definitely think is a spot that this crew falls into. Like, if you make a mistake, you are going to pay for it. It's a crew that thrives on having tons of movement tricks and being able to attack or escape from unexpected angles. And like one of the things you were saying was, I think that one of the problems with the game is that I was playing them a little bit too aggressively, which summoning Asami tends to play fairly aggressively. She's, maybe summoning some schemers early, but, she can summon Joragumo, she can summon Obsidian Oni to make bombs out of. She can summon yokai to take a bunch of attacks and not really care about the fact that they're going to build up flicker. This version of it, I feel like I was playing it wrong in that I really should have been playing it more to capitalize on the movement tricks and adding a little bit of extra survivability to the models, and then using the yokai to be able to interact while engaged, which is so huge in Break the Line. Like, it is enormous. To use Tengu for Dark Bargain so that I can, make other things interact after they move. To use Dark Bargain on Amanozako to, again, it's kind of like using obeys and moving your AP around to models that it's going to be more impactful on. So in some sense, I feel like I was probably playing the wrong game, even if it might have been the right crew for the scheme pool. And that's something that'll come with experience.
Yep. And I think that too. I very much think that's going to be, and I think it's going to be a title thing in general. It's like your first instinct is to play the crew like you've played the crew, and there's going to be some distinct style changes, which every title we've seen so far has a very unique style, a new play style added to it. To make, this version of Asami is not the missile Asami that we're used to. She's a much more, bounce things around the board Asami, which is cool and different. New Dreamer is going to take so much work to figure out. Like, he's wild. So I think we're going to see, and it's interesting because we've had, out of 4 titles, we've had 3 summoners revealed. And none of those summoners are really summoners anymore. Karai kind of is. Kind of. But
yeah. I think more than you might expect.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
just kind of dating things. So we're recording this on June 13th. So Tuesday, June 13th. We played our game 2 days ago. And then I got a chance to play like the first 2 turns of a game with new Karai. She summons a lot more
Yeah.
than you might think she does.
But she also only summons smaller models, so you're not summoning the big Goryo. You're limited. But they all have different play styles. So far that we've seen, they've all had different. It's going to take a while to figure out how they run and what areas. Like yokai were definitely seemed on, at least on paper. Unfortunately, your guy, he did really good. He just didn't finish the job. If he had finished the job, holy cow, that would have been a different story altogether in the game. Like the conventional wisdom with the first Asami is you don't really take yokai or even summon yokai. So the fact that yokai are now a better model because of Lady Yume and because of Asami is already like a shift in play style, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because now you can play that sort of like MSU style.
Mm-hmm. My first instinct with the crew was to take 3 yokai.
Like,
and I kind of feel like I should have.
That's 2E Asami right there, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like I should have taken the 3 yokai.
Yeah.
It would have drastically changed the way that the game played out, and I don't know that it would necessarily would have been better. But seeing those little blue monkeys jump around the table all over the place, I mean, like trying to lock those things down is
Right.
would just be a total nightmare. But it would have come at the cost of I wouldn't have been able to take Amano Zako. I still would have taken Lady Yume. Like obviously, I'm going to try the new model. And I'm probably going to take a Jorogumo. Like, if I have to choose between Amano Zako or a Jorogumo, I'm probably going to take the Jorogumo.
Mhm.
So that changes things a lot because then I have one beater model in the middle that's only defense 5 and has no other defensive tech. So it would have just gotten mobbed by all your big min 3 monsters. And then all I have left is a bunch of yokai. So, like, I don't know that would have worked out too good. But that was my first instinct when I saw the interactions that they have with Takusen and Lady Yume.
So what about Batari?
I may try that again next time. What's that?
What about Batari? How do you think she fits in?
I thought about her a lot. One of the things that kind of bums me out about her is that because you're not playing the summon, like she's one of those moderately high cost models that doesn't have a third AP that people get, all up in arms about. So her third AP is being able to place next to a model that's summoned. She loses that in this crew.
Right.
So she does get slowed down a good bit, but you can also kind of slingshot her up the board with the rifts, so that sort of makes up for it. Being able to, bounce into the middle of an enemy crew and then pulse out slow is pretty cool. I feel like she has play, but she still has kind of the same issues that she did, which are that her damage track is horrific. It's 235, which is like just terrible, terrible. She does have the double lure, which is really cool because you can use her to, move Asami up the board before she activates. She's got the pulse for slow, and of course, like unnerving presence to turn off resistance triggers can situationally be extremely powerful.
Right. Very, very much so.
I just don't know that she. I think she's still a situational kind of tech hire, and then at that point, what do you take? What do you drop instead of her?
Do you think in general Yume is probably going to replace Batari?
I think so because they're the same cost, and Yume has a very similar damage track, 236 instead of 235, but she's got a lot more versatility. She's got a lot more utility for the crew.
Mm-hmm. And hand fixing is big.
More. Hand fixing it, yeah, exactly. I mean, being able to draw and the scries happening so often, it's I can't see not taking her. And then at that point, do I take her and Batari? And then at that point, what else do I not take? It makes it very difficult to justify her. Yeah. Anyway, so the other concerns I have, and I shouldn't. This is not all doom and gloom. I think this is a fantastic crew. I just feel like it's going to take some time to unlock, like we talked about. But some concerns that I do have is that Asami herself can have some pretty unimpressive activations. Like she kind of feels a little bit like Wong, but with more out of activation utility. So like she can drop her rifts, which are great. They're shockwave 1, and because of the way that destructible terrain works is like if you're hitting an enemy model with them, all that enemy model has to do is then activate and spend a general AP with no restrictions to pick up the rift. So are you really dropping a rift for a Shockwave 1 move 13 damage 2 duel? Like,
Right.
that's not great for a master AP. So then you can't, unless you're firing off near an enemy model that hasn't, or that's already activated, you can't just drop one, because then they just use an AP and pick it up. So you drop two, and it's like, well, did they activate and then use both their AP to pick up both markers, and that's the end of their activation? Like, your enemy's probably not going to do that, but like, if you're putting a rift in a strategic position, your opponent knows that you're doing it for a reason. You're really telegraphing what you're trying to do in that turn
Right.
during Asami's activation. And it's so easy for them to disrupt your plans just by using an AP off of any model, or God forbid they take something that has like burn it down, like the Obsidian Oni,
Mhm.
or blow it to hell, or Thriller Driller on Soulstone Miners. Like, there's a lot of AoE anti-marker tech in the game, and while not all factions have it, all factions have models that have AP.
Yeah.
So because you're kind of telling your opponent what you're trying to do, if they can suss out that you're actually trying to use that marker for movement, they can just screw up your plans with literally any
Yeah.
model.
And I think you're going to probably look at faction by faction basis. Original summoning Asami is going to be better in Bayou and probably Explorers, because they have pretty good access to like just base marker removal. So whereas like Guild, Outcast has Mad Dog, but like they in general they don't have a huge amount of marker removal, and a huge amount. They usually don't have a huge amount of extra activations. They tend to play fairly elitish. Guild also tends to play pretty elite on a lot of their crews. So
Yeah, I guess. But then on the other hand, like, a lot of those crews that tend to play kind of elite also often have models with very punchy damage tracks. And like,
yeah,
I mean, if you got a model with a max 5 or 6 damage, you can just one shot half the models in the crew.
that's true. That's true. That's true.
So it's like, meh.
So yeah, I think that's one of the things looking at it. Like I like the fact that we've got pulls where you're definitely going to want to take the Asami that summons, and pulls that where you're going to want to take Rift Asami, because like Rift Asami is going to be really cool in like symbols. She's going to be pretty cool for and like rifts are already pretty good for deathbeds or for research mission. Like I like that you have those kind of cool options to like.
And yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said, I think Break the Line is great for her because of the way that yokai work, and the way that some of the other
Absolutely,
models work.
absolutely.
Like, there are some great pools for her. And there's some other really cool stuff that she can do. Like, you can play like the Mawtucket style or Syndicate style, like hazardous terrain stacking games,
Hmm.
where if you can do your activations in the order that you want to, you can have like, Aminozako putting out a huge aura of severe hazardous. Plus, you have rift markers that you can literally drop underneath enemy models because they're drops,
Hmm.
so that they're getting affected by them immediately. And if you take an Obsidian Oni, which you're probably going to do because they're just pretty
They're
good
so
models,
good, yeah.
they can put out a burning hazardous marker, burning hazardous aura that's pretty big. So like, you can do those really silly like terrain, hazardous terrain stacking things where somebody's taking damage from 2 or 3 different types of hazardous at a time. Now, granted, this crew doesn't really have the triggers or the ability to move enemy models that some of those other hazardous stacking crews do. So it's tougher to capitalize on it, but it's not necessarily something that you'd expect coming out of Thunders. So I think that could probably catch some people by surprise.
Yeah. You could bring the Wonder Weasel with her. You don't see him very often, but Dust Devil plus Rifts.
Yeah, I mean, it's another type of hazardous terrain, and the the Kamatachi isn't. I don't think the Kamatachi is a fantastic model, but it is certainly a cheap one. And one cool thing is, in order to create the Dust Devils, you have to discard a flicker token. But the only other action that the Kamatachi has on its card is an attack action. So the only way that you used to be able to gain flicker tokens was by attacking models, usually your own models, and then just burning a flicker and just hoping you don't hit or whatever. Now with Lady Yume, you can actually, when she activates, put a flicker token on the Kamitachi to preload it with flicker so that it can then create a Dust Devil. So first turn it can walk and then create a Dust Devil within 6, and that's pretty significant. It's a 40 mil severe hazardous marker, which it can then, assuming you get it into combat, which it's not going to last long. It's only defense 5/4 wounds, but if you hit the into the vortex trigger, which is built in on its melee, you can move the Dust Devil around, giving out stagger, doing more damage. Like there's some play there. I just don't know if it's only a 4-stone model, so I guess I can't ask for much out of it. But yeah. So, I mean, I think that we both kind of talked a little bit about how we feel about Lady Yume. We probably don't need to go on about it ad nauseum. I think that she's just a generally solid model, and I would have a difficult time not taking her in any Asami crew.
I agree. I think she's going to be pretty ubiquitous.
Yeah, and then what do you feel? I mean, how do you feel about Dreamer? Not talking about Insomniac because he's very, very new, but I mean, if you want to, you can certainly speak to him. But do you think you would take her in most Nightmare crews?
I think I'm going to need to try her out. There's things that I really like, but also that crew has some really juicy Enforcer models and Henchman models. So it's like I feel like she's got more competition in a Dreamer crew than she does in Asami, because like you've got to look at Widow Weaver, Capellius, Serena, like all of those are really top notch models. But she does do some card draw and some hand fixing, which is something that Dreamer doesn't have. So I don't.
Yeah, there's definitely more competition there because, like, at a certain point, like, do you take Lady Yume and then do you also take the models that you need to summon Stitched? And then how much space is there left in the crew? Like, gets a little sketchy. But I mean, I definitely still feel like she's worth a look, and I do feel like people are probably going to take her a lot because she her feat on fear is going to see a lot more play in a Dreamer crew, so she's going to stand a chance of staying up. The Terrifying 12 is fantastic for Dreamer, like super duper fantastic, especially summoning Dreamer. So she'll be definitely more survivable in that crew. And she'll bring just kind of different tech than she does in the Asami crew. And I feel like it's really cool that they managed to build that difference in tech on a single model, depending on which crew it's hired into.
I agree. It's really neat. And
she's a very well-designed model.
It'll be interesting to see if that extrapolates out to the other new models, if there are other new models that we'll see. I'm assuming at this point we've seen a couple. We've seen artwork for models for Sonya's crew from the other side, where the assumption is that those models will also have Malifaux. I can't imagine that just the masters in each of those boxes will have Malifaux rules when they come with a whole bunch of models. So we know that there's some models in that box. We know that there's some more, starter boxes coming. We've seen the Bayou starter box coming. It's pretty safe to assume that models that are in starter boxes that are coming out nowish will probably be in the same book. So we'll probably see the Catalan box, the Bayou box, and now we see Lady Yume. So I'm excited. I'm really excited about titles. I think I was a little skeptical at first. Because it is such a huge change to the game. But this is a great way, I think, to introduce new play and new play styles without super bloating the game by throwing in entire new keywords or entire new factions or, my biggest question, and honestly, is going to be, where does Weird go after this? what's next year going to look like? Because this is a pretty big step.
Yeah, I really really love the title system because it allows the design flexibility to take crews in totally different directions, like we've seen with Asami.
Hmm.
And like obviously this Asami crew, just based on the master alone, no other, well, Lady Yume too, but basically just based on the master alone, takes this one crew in a completely different direction in terms of play style. And it also allows them to advance the storyline for those
Hmm.
folks that really follow the fluff. Um,
That's me.
and that's something that other games who shall not be named, and other game companies have really been criticized for, is having very stagnant
Hmm.
storylines that don't advance much year over year. And I feel like Weird has done a great job at continually advancing that story, and now this mechanic allows them to show development of characters over time and what the effect of that time has on the way that they play.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that. I mean, like,
Without,
look at Dashel. Dashel
yeah,
was just a guy. Like, then he was a captain, and now he's like a commander. And because he went from enforcer, henchman, all the way up to master now, which is cool that you were able to see that kind of evolution of him through the in different phases of the game. So now we have kind of an end game, and if you want to, you know, if you like Dreamer more as a kid, you can play Kid Dreamer. If you like Dreamer more as or summoning Kid Dreamer, or you can play him as the cranky, hasn't got enough sleep Dreamer.
right. Yeah, they're not forcing you to use the new play style. They're
Correct.
not dead man's handing all of the original versions of the masters and saying, "Too bad, so sad. Now you're playing this
Mhm.
master because that's where they are in the story." You still have the flexibility to play either version, but they're still showing you how things and characters and storyline and abilities are progressing, which I think they've done it in a very artful way.
Absolutely.
And based on the alternate titles that we've seen so far, I really feel like, and who knows if this will play out with the rest of the ones that are going to be coming out, when they release. But I can honestly say that I don't feel like any of the alternate titles that they've shown are overtly better or like
Right.
drastically better or worse than the originals. I don't see a lot of power creep here.
Guild players would probably, because most guild players are very down on Sonya, would probably say that new Sonya is much better, but I think she's better for the play style that the game is sitting, like that the competitive version of the game is sitting in at the moment. I think new Sonya is probably going to be, and the the echo chambers will eventually roll out. One version is superior to the other. The it's how competitive games play. But the cool thing about Malifaux is no matter how many times somebody tells you this is the thing to play, this is the thing to play, someone will then sweep in with something ridiculous and win a couple tournaments, and everybody's going, okay. Play style. It's such a complex game that play style and what you're comfortable with will almost always top like what is objectively the best.
Yeah, I mean, you can exactly. I mean, somebody who's competent and experienced with one of the lower, what some consider lower tier masters, like for instance, like Brewmaster or Wong, just stuff that I'm familiar with. If they play those masters competently, I have beaten very competent Nekama players, or one particular very competent Nekama player with Brewmaster, and like Nekama's like real high on the pecking order in Neverborn, and Brewmaster is pretty low on the pecking order in Bayou, at least by general consensus. Not to say that I'm a fantastic player, but like there really aren't very many of those like rock paper scissors matchups in Malifaux. There really are not.
And there's just
So good job on you, Weird,
Yeah.
for
there's so many moving
designing such a great
parts.
game.
There's so many moving parts that like it's never going to be a solved game. It's never going to be Guild Ball. It's never going to be like even like I've been kind of like lurking into Marvel Crisis Protocol because I love superheroes, and the game is solid. It's a fun game, and I've stayed away from competitive because I don't really want to play it competitively. I just want to play superheroes. I just want to, but it's already kind of has a feeling of like there are certain situations where it's semi solved. And Malifaux's just never been that way. Like the closest we had to it was what, second edition Sandeep, and even he didn't have like 100% win rate, right? Like or anywhere close, really. It's just like,
I mean, there's always those. Yeah, exactly.
So
at any rate, so we're recording on a Tuesday night. I'm gonna. What time is it? I'm not going to be able to edit it tonight. So, using a little bit of our foresight and maybe some wishful thinking, Maeve, what would you like to see teased in Waldo's Weekly tomorrow, assuming they do a Altmaster tease?
I'd like to see one of my Bayou friends. I would love to see what they're going to do with Sommer. Since they're already on a summoner kick, like just drop Sommer out there for me. I would love to see a version of Wong that excites me to really play him. Like, I think Bayou is the next thing we need to see some Bayou.
I've got a feeling that Bayou's going to be next as well, and maybe again that's just wishful thinking on my part. I think if I had to pick one master, it would probably be Ma. I would love to see what they do with her.
Yeah, for sure, because she's such a well balanced, interesting master already. It'll be interesting to see how you take another spin on that keyword. Because it's a very weird keyword with a lot of strange little like sub context. Like there's robots, there's shooting, there's like. So it'll be interesting to see, do they lean into robots? Do they lean into shooting? Do we have another fairly balanced playstyle master? Like it'll be
I'd love to see them lean into robots, especially with the new Sparks changes,
right.
which you and I are going to have a Sparks episode real soon. That I'm committing to the meta, committing to the universe of Malifaux fans.
Maybe she'll summon in Rooster Riders.
That'd be funny. So I just have to say one thing before we close out. Apparently, I was subconsciously so disgusted with the performance of my Oni crew that this morning, while I was having my coffee, I literally spilled a full ass cup of coffee all over my Oni cards on my desk.
Oh
no! So yeah, I have to buy all new Oni
That's
cards.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. They all have this nice like kind of brown stain around the edges.
Right.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It'd be perfect if they were Swamp Fiends, but not Oni.
It'd be perfect. Yeah, not the Oni. So, all right. Did you have anything else to add? Anything to plug?
No, I think I've been kind of in a hiatus on content creation recently. Just work literally pounded me into the ground the past 6 months, and now I'm getting ready to go back to school. So we'll see, if I can balance work, master's classes, and try to produce some stuff. I'll probably just borrow fame and lurk on yours and Cody's podcast. It's fine.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you get pretty cool life developments with the going back to school, and then I actually just accepted a position which is going to drastically change my my workday and the path of my career. So I'm really hoping that I can maintain regular releases for the podcast. I've actually got a couple of really cool recordings coming up. We're going to try and make this into a little mini series of podcast releases, and I may actually try to do multiple releases a month if I can manage it right up through Gen Con. But we obviously recorded our Asami Takusen episode, and I have games lined up to play against all of the other alternate masters that have been teased so far.
Nice.
So Probably next up, I have a Karai Envoy of the Court game that I'm hoping we can play in the next week and record within a day or so of that. I have another local player lined up to do a Dreamer Insomniac episode, and Adam is probably going to be popping on to do a Sonya Unmasked.
Nice. That's very cool.
And then I'm hoping to get all of those games banged out in the next week and a half because I'm on vacation from work next week before I start my new gig. So if I can do that and get through the editing, then I'm going to try and do multiple pod releases, as I can, and as my hosting will allow me to, leading up to Gen Con to really try and build the hype for these things. So,
well, if they tease Summer next week or tomorrow, whatever, I will definitely line up to play New Summer. I'll be excited, especially because I'm a little down on him right on the old version at the moment. Like, I'm just sad. I'm just.
You mean on our Summer-sode last week where we talked about summoning, but really we talked about Summer?
Yeah. But New Summer will make me happy, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure. All right, so if that about does it, then I'd like to thank Maeve for joining me on the pod. Please do join in the boring conversation. Let us know what you'd like to hear. Let us know your thoughts on the episode. You can join us on our Discord channel. You can join us on our Facebook page. And feel free to give feedback. Also, I can't ask enough. One of the things that can really help get our podcast out there is rating and reviewing us. So please, 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 if you have time, rate and review us on the podcast platform of your choice. And with that, I wish all of you a wonderful evening. Keep your conversations boring, and above all, stay weird, folks.